Good morning, everyone. This is Jeffy Kennedy, author of epic fantasy romance. I'm here with my first cup of coffee. Today is, say it with me, people, it is Friday. Woohoo! November 1st, All Saints Day, Dia de los Muertos. Yeah. Uh, Yesterday, Halloween, very quiet for me. I did go vote, which was surprisingly cathartic. Um, it was, and I, of course, because I'm not insane, voted for Harrison Waltz. And yeah, it was very peaceful here. A couple people asked me how it was. And we vote a couple blocks down the street at the senior center in our very liberal neighborhood, in our very liberal city in our blue state. And, it's early voting, and we went at about 4 in the afternoon, 4:30, and we were able to just walk right in, and everybody was lovely, and said welcome to early voting and all of that. And one thing that I have really enjoyed about the Harris Waltz campaign in these last few days is that they've been putting out the message to vote with joy. And boy, and that you can hear it in my voice, that makes me emotional. um, it I thought about that as I was voting with joy. When was the last freaking time we felt like we could vote with joy? And I was remembering that in 2016, I was so excited. I did feel like I was voting with joy. I was so happy to be voting for Hillary Clinton, and so excited to think that I got to vote for the first woman president. And of course, those of us who voted then, remember the terrible, horrible crash, the astonishing, staggering revelation of what had happened, the manipulation of the Electoral College. Even though Hillary won the popular vote, that Trump and his cronies had manipulated the system, and we're all burned from that. And in my Discord, even, I have been trying to talk people down from anxiety. And it's not that I'm not feeling that same anxiety, that feeling that same sense of being so afraid that we'll have that same switch out. Um, and since I brought up the topic, I know I said I was going to talk politics on this podcast until after the election, and then hopefully never again. I don't want to have to talk politics, right? We all want to be in that luxurious place where we don't have to think and talk about politics all the time. We just want competent people to run the government so that we can go on with our lives and not have to be um, bound by other people's religions, right? That should not be so much to ask. That's supposed to be the foundation of our country, right? Anyway, uh, but what I've been telling people and reminding, it's the same thing I'm reminding myself, that Hillary Clinton won the popular vote in 2016, that it was only through that manipulation, the gerrymandering and manipulation of the Electoral College, that allowed Trump to win. He probably should not have been allowed to win. We have hindsight there. In 2020, he lost, fairly lost. And I think that they've done so much to try to erode our belief in that. But Biden and Harris won, clearly won in 2020. There was no doubt that they won, and by a wider margin than the defeat in 2016. So in 2022, the midterm elections, they went on and on about their frickin' red wave and how that was going to happen, and did not materialize, and by a considerable margin. And we flipped several states blue, and we didn't get as all the way to where we wanted to be, but things have continued to move into that direction. And this year we have Democratic incumbents, We have an immensely popular team. Harris and Walz have a hugely high approval rating. Whereas, Hillary Clinton was wrongly, I believe, but a very disliked character. I mean, there were, even in many liberal and moderate circles, there were a lot of people who did not like her, who did not want Bill Clinton back near the White House, which, may be fair because he caused so many problems. All the way back to Monica Lewinsky and, the whole thing with Bill Clinton being a tough dog to keep on the porch, that it was hard on everyone. And there were a lot of Democrats who even did not care for having the Clintons back in the White House, unfortunately, which opened the door for that. In 2020, Joe Biden was hardly a hugely charismatic character then, right? Nothing like Kamala Harris and Tim Walz. So the other thing that, and I promise I won't talk about this the whole time, the other thing that I find calming for myself is to remember that Biden and Harris are in the White House. They are in control of the White House. They are in control of the federal government. So all of these things that Trump and his cronies are saying that they want to do, they don't get to do it unless he's inaugurated, and that wouldn't be until January. They're onto his shenanigans, and the government is on our side in this. So despite all of the hysteria, I think we're all afraid, we're all wound up. It was David and I both commented that filling in that little oval, marking our vote for Harrison Waltz, was so released a lot of emotional energy. It really made a difference. And I've been seeing people vote about it or post about it, with their I voted stickers. And I'm seeing the same thing on their faces. I'm seeing the smiles, and it's like, this is the thing we can control. There are a lot of things about this situation we can't control, but that's the point of being in a democracy, is we can vote, and we did vote, and we will vote. So please go out and vote if you haven't already. Yeah, felt good to do that. So I do have like writing related things to talk about. The book is coming along well. I had a funny conversation with my friend Kelly Robson yesterday, who checked in with me to ask me how the book was coming along. And I said, I want to read you exactly what I said because I just think it's kind of funny. If I can find it. I said, I'm still drafting at 75K, which means I have about 13K to go. I go back and forth between thinking it's brilliant, then that it's full of holes. And she said, sounds normal, which, yes. So, and I did this morning, I think I figured out the ending. I think I know how it's going to end. In fact, I'm going to pause a moment, write something down. Often at this point in the book, I feel like I've got way more stuff that I can fit into the space I have remaining. But I was also remembering yesterday that, when I say that I'm at 75K and I'm figuring somewhere around 88,000, right now I am very solidly on all of my beats. But I can add to this book, and I'm probably going to add substantially. I picked those 88,000 because that was where the first draft of Never the Roses came out, was at 87,763. And once I revised it, it was up to, by the time all is said and done, it's up to 104,000 words. So my revision that I did for Editor Alley was over 10,000 words. So, I probably could go up to like 120,000. I haven't asked what my upper limit is. But, I could still add daunting thought. I'm at 75K. I could probably still add 40,000 words if I needed to, which is like nearly half of what I have so far. So, but I always do this. I always think, start feeling like I've got more plot and resolution to cram into the story than I have space left. And that is simply not the case. Um, it, I always manage to get it all in, or I can go longer. So today, I guess I'm talking a whole lot about coping with worry and anxiety and encountering those with real things, with yeah, the okay, what is the logical thing here? We our emotions are the horses that pull the chariot, and they can really run away. They can really do crazy things if we let them. But rationality, logic, those are the reins, and that's where we say, no, 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 we're not going to go crashing through the forest. We're going to go down this road. Please pull the chariot, because the passions are what keep us going. But we, yeah, don't need to worry about this. You know, oh, look at those trees, look at that cliff, all of these things. Um, Speaking of clips, I wasn't planning to talk about this today, and it's not really publishing, but it's on my mind. I saw this fascinating meme being passed around for Halloween, and I'll share it with you. Uh, Someone named David Zemensky. I know a guy in school named Zinsky, Zemansky. So I think I'm saying it right. I don't know who he is. He could be famous, could be not. But he says his handle, this was on Twitter, his handle is at DUSKDEV. So some sort of robotics person. Anyway, he said one of the most frightening things I've ever heard is when someone pointed out that the existence of the uncanny valley implies that at some point there was an evolutionary reason to be afraid of something that looked human but wasn't. And isn't that fascinating? I've shared that with a couple people this morning. I shared it with my old friend and one-time lover from college, Darren Olivero, who lives in Hong Kong now, and we've been messaging some. It's been really fun to talk to Darren. We were in Equus together. He played the lead in Equus. I had a very small part of the nurse. I think I had 2 lines because I was also very busy with finishing up in pre-med and applying for graduate school and all of this kind of thing. I wasn't pre-med by that point, but I was applying for graduate school, and it was my senior year. Anyway, Darren and I had a great deal of fun together that senior year in college, and for a little bit after. Well, anyway, that's a rabbit hole. I won't tell you everything about that, but it's been really fun to talk to him again. And yeah, so he's a graphic designer in Hong Kong and into sailing. But anyway, I shared this with him and we were talking about it. For those of you who don't know, the Uncanny Valley is a theory, basically, that, and I'll give you the wording that I sent to Darren. Um, there's a graph, and it was coined in the 1970s by Masahiro Mori, who was a robotics designer. And he identified that in designing human-like robots, that there was this curve where as you increase their likeness to a human being, people felt more affinity for it up to a certain point at which, so the graph goes up, and then it would abruptly plummet down into actual revulsion, where people would be repelled by, if it looked almost human but not quite human, that people would be revolted by it. And it was called the Uncanny Valley, the valley and the graph. And so this thing saying that this implies that somewhere in our evolution we learned to be afraid of something that looked human but wasn't, is definitely creepy and apropos for an episode here today on All Saints Day. Uh, but a couple of things there. Apparently, since robotics designers, because I did go down a slight rabbit hole on this, have discovered that it's really more of a cliff, that instead of a valley, that there isn't an upswing on the other side. That at least so far, they have not yet created something that is an artificial human that appears very human, but that doesn't generate that sense of unease. Uh, and Darren commented, because I thought as a graphic designer he would be interested in this. And he said he hadn't really thought about it before. He'd never heard of this before. And he said, but he can clearly understand that he had contemplated the phenomenon of CGI, which he would have described as so close but creepy. But a Pixar cartoon is charming, right? And so yeah, it's an interesting thing. As a neuroethologist, since I referenced graduate school where I went for neurophysiology, I haven't followed this research on this kind of thing, but I would suspect that even though it is gives us a delightful shiver, this idea that at some point in our evolution we learned to be afraid of something that looked human but wasn't, it probably has more to do with our the way our brains perceive faces. That now we know there are face detectors in the brain, that we have extensive parts of our brain that process micro expressions that we read in people. And one of the great lessons of Zoom during the pandemic, right, was that it was exhausting to interact with people only through the screen because we miss those body cues. We miss the chemicals of being in the same room with someone, that there are a lot of other things that are going on with human interaction besides whether or not something looks human to us. But still fascinating to contemplate, right? So I did have a couple of notes left over on things to talk about. One of them was an addendum to something I talked about probably a couple of weeks ago with the gal saying, I'm a best-selling author and I can't, afford to, I make no money at it. And inevitably there are people who say that they are best-selling authors and, very bitterly disappointed about the money on it. And there's a couple of things to say to that. One is and we went and looked on this gal who said that I'm a best-selling author. We went and looked and we couldn't find anywhere that she was like an actual best-selling author. So, hitting number one in your category on Amazon for a day doesn't really count. Even if Amazon gives you the little bestseller ribbon, it's nice. I've taken screenshots. That makes me happy. It does not make you a best-selling author. Uh, People want it to, if if it strokes your ego, sure, enjoy it. If you want to put it on your social media, fine. But best-selling does not mean making lots of money. It never has. For those of you who don't know that, even the New York Times bestseller list is somewhat formed of smoke and mirrors, right? It's only it's samples from certain bookstores, chosen bookstores, and there is a tremendous amount of behind the scenes influence. It's not based on exact numbers. It's similar to how Amazon does things, where we're very aware that Amazon's own imprints are given a leg up in the algorithm, that those books are either going to sell better because they're given much more what's the word I want? A lot more light is shined upon them. They're surfaced more for people. And also, the Amazon can do whatever it wants. It can show that it's sold so many copies, whether it has or not. There's no board of ethics that controls how Amazon shows its numbers, right? We accept it the same way we do with the New York Times bestseller list, but it's not science, people. It's not like QA'd research numbers established through a quantifiable method, right? So the only way that you know that you are going to make money as an author is when you are actually making money as an author. And then it's, so much depends from there, right? Depends on your lifestyle, um, how much money you need to live on, right? So on that note, I'm going to go finish my book so that I do get money to live on. And I will talk to you all on Monday. Uh, I hope that you can focus on rational and calming things. Um, don't worry, be happy, vote with joy. You all take care. Bye bye.